Well, it's good to see you all, and today we are looking at leading others well. And I'm starting on a general session, which is looking at leading others, and I want to pick up on really two things. One, how might we have teams that flourish? And then the second thing I want us to think about is around conversation, communication, the importance of communication to make sure teams are working well. Like many others, I'm sure, over this unusual season, we've spent an awful lot more time at home, and also maybe an awful lot more time in the garden, particularly when the weather was a bit nicer than it is when I'm recording this. And I probably have done a lot more gardening than I have done over the past few years, and I must say that I find a lot of situations that God speaks to me through the garden and the tasks that I'm doing there. And in terms of this session and around leadership, very much the case too. This spring, my wife has tried to grow some vegetables and in particular some kale plants. And she planted some kale seeds back in spring. And some were planted in the greenhouse. Some were planted in some seed trays that we left out outside the greenhouse. And then some, as they grew a bit bigger, were planted directly into a vegetable bed that we were trying to make. What we noticed was that despite all the seeds coming from the same packet and being planted at the same time, the environment that they grew in had a serious impact on their performance and their success, probably more than the individual seeds. And it's the same with teams, that the environment that our teams are in can have a bigger effect than the individual people. You see, the ones in the greenhouse, they were doing really well and they were flourishing until one week we forgot to water them, and in the hot weather they all started to wilt. The ones that we put onto some seed trays, again, they were doing okay until they became pot bound and suddenly found that they couldn't grow any bigger and then didn't really do terribly well. And the ones we planted in the veg patch, well, they were doing really well too. And they were looking good and healthy, and probably a bit too good and healthy because the slugs found them and ate all the leaves. So leadership lessons from the garden: buy your kale from the supermarket, possibly, but no. The environment or the culture of in which our teams operate is often more important or has a greater influence on success than the individual team members. And so, from a gardening perspective, and also with a nod to Nehemiah, a wonderful book about leadership, in this first half of this session, I want to look at three things that will allow our teams to flourish. And the three things are enrichment, support, and protection. So let's have a look at those three things. Enrichment. It's obvious, isn't it? Enrichment in terms of a garden, that's the stuff that we put into the soil to allow the plant to grow and to flourish. And every person thrives on encouragement. I don't think I've ever met anyone that doesn't feel better after someone's encouraged them. Every person in your team needs you to invest and to build them up. Think of it like this. Think of each person like a bank account. Every time you ask someone to do something, no matter how good it is, you are making a withdrawal. Every time they find difficulty, it's a withdrawal. Every negative word or comment, however helpful or however much it's feedback and it's constructive criticism, is a withdrawal. And if we're not careful, the bank account will quickly go into red, and that is not good for anyone. But every time you say well done, it's a deposit. Every time you say thank you to someone, it's a deposit. Every pat on the back or smile or thumbs up is a deposit. Every time you turn up at a meeting or an event that person's running to cheer them on, and nothing more than that, it's a deposit. Every coffee catch up, every phone call, every moment you spend with someone is a deposit. We used to say in teaching that the ratio of praise to criticism should be 3-1, or even in some cases 5-1. It is so important to keep that bank account of encouragement topped up. Never underestimate the power of your time with someone else. You may just think you're you. Well, it's just me. Why? But to someone else, you're the leader, you're the boss, you're the main person. And they will value your time, your input, and your presence. Nehemiah knew also the power of words to inspire. You see, we can encourage people through the words that we say, and we'll talk a little bit more in the second half. But although in Nehemiah we don't have any personal one-to-one conversations recorded, I'm sure he would have walked around the wall as they were rebuilding and encouraged people and cheered them on and said well done to them. But we do see in Nehemiah 2, 17, 18, we see Nehemiah's use of words. Let me just read that. Then I said to them, you see the trouble we're in? Jerusalem lies in ruins, and its gates have been burned with fire. Come, let us rebuild the walls of Jerusalem, and we will no longer be in disgrace. I also told them about the gracious hand of God on me and what the king had said to me. So Nehemiah, in words, says things, and look at the response of the people. The people replied, let us start rebuilding. So they began this good work. You see the impact of good words? As we encourage, as we build up, we will always see a flourishing of people. A psychologist back in the 50s and 60s, Frederick Heisberg, did some research into what motivates people, particularly in a work context. And I've used this as a training tool when I used to teach leadership in school education settings. And he developed this two-stage theory. He identified factors that, if they are present, will create motivation. The motivators. And he also discovered factors which, if they weren't there, create demotivation, and he called those the hygiene things. You see, not everything will motivate and not everything will demotivate. For example, praise will always motivate someone. If you praise someone, they will always feel more motivated. But if you don't praise, you're not demotivating them, you're just not motivating them. And on the other side, some of the hygiene factors will be something like reward or payment, particularly if you're employed. You aren't motivated by pay, or most people are not motivated by pay. You don't work harder as it gets closer to payday. So the act of paying someone doesn't motivate them. But if you were to stop paying someone, if you were to take that away, that would become a demotivator. And so by that being removed, they would be demotivated. You'll see in your notes, I've tried to express it as a rocket on a launch pad. So the rocket is a thing that will allow people to flourish and motivate, but we need the launch pad, the hygiene factors there. You see, the motivate things are often things that cost nothing. They're often things that really only cost our time and our effort, but they bring such a great job satisfaction, which in turn leads to great productivity, great teams, and teams that flourish. I've put some in our notes there: gratitude, recognition, achievement, responsibility. Even the work itself can be a motivator. You can be motivated if you're given good things to do. That will encourage and motivate you. Can you think of any other things that would be motivators? Things that motivate you, things that cause you to work harder. Maybe just write some down and then make sure that you are doing those for other people. But remember, what motivates you may not motivate everybody. So it's worth thinking what motivates other people. You can go into the whole thing of the 5 love languages, because those are the things that we value and respect, and therefore may, if someone shows those to us, they may motivate us. So what other things could you do to motivate the teams that you lead? And then you've got the launch pad, or the what Heisberg will call the hygiene factors, and I've put 5 down there: working conditions, policy, supervision, team-based relationships, and pay, particularly if employed. See, these in themselves do not bring motivation. You are not motivated by a nice, tidy office. But if the nice tidy office wasn't there, if you were working, you're not motivated if you go into a church building and it's warm. But if you go into a church building and it's cold and it smells and it's difficult to work in, that will demotivate you. You're not motivated by the relationships around you. But if the relationships across a team or with your leader are not good, they will demotivate you. You're certainly not motivated by policy, but if there's not policy, that can lead to demotivation. So in the same way we thought about the things that may motivate us, take a moment now to write down some things that have demotivated you in teams. What are some of the things that, when they are being missing, you have found they have took away your motivation and your drive? And then with these, we strive to make sure they're in place. Because when they're missing, it's not that the teams don't flourish and take off. They just can't take off because they are unmotivated or demotivated. Have a think about that. So that's my first thing, is around enrichment, the things that we do that build people up. The second thought, as I look in the garden and as I look at Nehemiah, is support. In a gardening context, these are the frames or the trellises or the bamboo canes that we put in place to allow the plants to grow and therefore to flourish. And in a church context, these might be things such as policy and working agreements, as well as more human support such as community and relationships, a lot of those hygiene factors we just talked about. Now, Paul Bedford in the second session will talk a little bit more about some of these and some of the journey they've gone through as Hope House in Barnsley. But these things are important to have in place. But can I just add this comment on to what he will say later? Just remember that structure and policy is there to support and allows teams to flourish, not to restrict or control. Structure and policy is there for support, not to control. We never use structure or policy to control. Difficult issues are resolved through talking, not policy. You don't put something in place to deal with one person that therefore may impact everyone else. It's much better to go and have a conversation. I learnt that as a teacher. If I've got one difficult student, I don't put a law in place that impacts the other 31. I go and speak to the one difficult one and resolve the problem. And we'll cover that in the second half, how we may have difficult conversations. And when we look in Nehemiah, we see him putting support in place. No, we don't see a policy document that he's built or working agreements being put in place. But when you look through chapter 3 of Nehemiah, you see the wonderful structure of teams working together. Teams that obviously knew what they were doing, they knew their remit, but they also knew the boundaries of what they were asked to do. And sorry if I get any of these pronunciations wrong, but in chapter 3, Eliashib, the high priest, and his fellow priests went to work and rebuild the sheep gate. They dedicated it and set its doors in place, building as far as the Tower of the 100, which they dedicated, and as far as the Tower of Hanil. So they know the regions they're working in. And then alongside them, the men of Jericho built the adjoining section, and Zaccur, son of Imrah, built next to them. You see how everyone is working, knowing what they're doing, because there is the support, the structure, the policy around them to allow them to flourish. So policy, support is important. As I've said, Paul will pick up more on that in session 2. So we need enrichment. We need to encourage one another. We need support around us, those structures to allow us to flourish. And then my third point in this section is protection. One batch of our plants, of our kale plants, got eaten by the slugs. And as you look at your team, no, they won't be eaten by slugs, but they'll be destroyed by criticism. They'll be ripped to shreds by negativity. And as a leader, it is our job to protect our teams from these things. One simple thing we can do as leaders is to choose to do this following thing. I try and do this as much as I can. Where possible, deflect praise when it's given to you, to the team, and take personal responsibility for criticism. You see, never blame others. We should never have that conversation. It would have worked if so-and-so had done their job, with others from outside of our team. Always keep debate and disagreement and tension. Tension's healthy, tension's good, but keep that within team and avoid gossip and blaming. I'll often use the analogy of a guitar. A guitar sings when it's in tension. Tension's a healthy thing, but it needs to be kept in the right place, and that's within team conversations, not out in the public forum. So protection is also the reason why we have policy and we have procedures in place. You see, a good policy protects team. For example, a good financial procedure ensures that the team are protected from fraud, from temptation, and from false allegations. When there is good policy in place, that brings protection. In Nehemiah, we see how Nehemiah put things in place to protect his team from attack. And this is, again, some great examples of good teamwork and careful processes. In Nehemiah 4, it says, "From that day on, half of my men did the work, while the other half were equipped with spears, shields, bows and armor. I said to the nobles, the officials and the rest of the people, the work is extensive and spread out, and we are widely separated from each other along the wall. Wherever you hear the sound of the trumpet, join us there. Our God will fight for us." And you see how he is putting things in place to protect the team, to allow them to flourish. So those are three things that I see from a gardening context and from looking at Nehemiah. But you might want to just think, what else needs to be in place for teams to flourish? I know Paul will pick up on a few others in the next session. Maybe think for yourself, what are some of the other factors that need to be in place to ensure teams flourish? There are things like trust, accountability. Have a think through some other ones. But the three that I've thought about in this session is to enrich and encourage your team regularly. Check that each person's encouragement bank is topped up. And to do that, invest your time and your energy into the things that bring motivation to people. Listen and take action when you hear them. Put the support around people to allow them to flourish. Remember, like a trellis, it should be hidden, and then the work should flourish around it, but it brings essential support and structure. And do all you can to protect your team. And these are even more important in the early days. The kale got eaten because it was young. I think in a few months' time, if it had grown, it would have probably been more hardy and would have coped with the issues. I've just had the situation in the city here of taking over the leadership of a team. It's connected with the prayer movement that we talked about at the beginning of the year, and I'm leading the operations team. And it's a new team, and I've been asked to lead it. And it's a cross-church team. It's got lots of people, lots of different churchmanship and backgrounds, lots of different experiences. We've also had the problem that we've launched this team while Zoom is in operation, and that brings its own problems. And it's took some time and some investment to see the people begin to flourish. Some individuals in this team needed a lot of encouragement, needed a lot of topping up, needed a lot of time and conversation to hear their heart and their concerns. Some needed some time to focus them so they didn't just, and a bit of structure so they knew what they were about, so they understood what the team was about, not just what they were about. And some quieter ones needed time to find their strengths and their purpose. It's still a journey we're on, but I hope, because we want to see teams flourish, we invest into the team to make it work. The environment and the culture around a team are probably the biggest factors to see it flourish. So that's my first thing. So do think for a moment, what other factors do you see as important to be in place for teams to flourish? I'm going to move into the second half of this session, because a key skill that we need to oversee teams and to lead teams is communication. The ability to communicate what we're feeling, what we're thinking, to communicate vision, but also the ability to have conversation with people, in particular difficult conversations. And in this second half, I want to look at two things. I want to look at communication in general, but I also want to look at difficult conversations and give a few words of advice or experience from having had some difficult conversations and having had some that have gone very badly wrong, and others that have gone very well. Now, as a leader, one of the main conversations that we will have, and we have to have often, is the vision conversation. It's the constant why we are doing things. For Nehemiah, the reason they were grafting away to rebuild the wall wasn't to see the wall rebuilt. That wasn't the vision. That was the vehicle to fulfill the vision. The vision was to see Jerusalem restored. We heard a glimpse of that, didn't we, back in Nehemiah 2. Then I said to them, you see the trouble we're in? Jerusalem lies in ruins, and its gates have been burned with fire. Come, let us rebuild the walls of Jerusalem, and we will no longer be in disgrace. You see, the vision there is for Jerusalem and hence Israel to be restored. And the rebuilding of the walls was a process or a vehicle to get them there. This isn't a one-off conversation that we have as a leader. We don't just suddenly pop up and say, this is the vision, and everyone grabs it and takes hold of it, and that's the end of that conversation. Why? Because vision leaks. Life is hard. Church can be draining. We can find enthusiasm can wane and disappear. People get disillusioned. They get hurt. They get tired. And as leaders, we need to keep check on people's hearts. We need to keep check on how they are doing. We need to keep reinforcing the vision, the why we are doing these things. In Nehemiah 4, we see that the work was hard, that there was attack from outside, and that vision was leaking. The people in Judah said, the strength of the labourers is giving out, and there is so much rubble that we cannot rebuild the wall. They were giving up. There were too many knocks that were pulling them down. You see, when vision leaks, we lose focus of the mission and we focus on our mess. And that's a problem. When vision leaks, we lose focus of the mission, the why, the where we're going, and we focus on our mess that we're stood in, and that then becomes a problem. Because when we focus on our mess, our feelings, our grumbles, our complaints rise to the surface. This is too hard. I haven't got any energy. My diary's too busy. We give up. When we lose focus on the mission, when we lose focus on the outward, we start to focus on the inward and the relationships, and then all sorts of problems can happen. What causes vision to leak? Well, most things. Life, time, knocks. A simple disappointment can make you lose focus. And you can quickly find yourself in a spiral of self-examination, or worse, comparison. Suddenly someone else's success in a team is your failure, even though the success is the common goal. Can you imagine as they're building that wall and they look down and go, well, his bit's better, don't know why I'm bothering. But they're all building the same wall. And to stop vision leaking, we need to constantly remind people of the vision, the why we do what we do. And Nehemiah did this in such a powerful speech. He said, after I looked things over, I stood up and said to the nobles, the officials and the rest of the people, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid of them. Remember the Lord who is great and awesome, and fight for your families, your sons and your daughters, and your wives and your home. Remind people of the why, and they will keep focused on the what and the journey there. We can also see a few things from Nehemiah about one-to-one conversations. How do we have these personal one-to-one conversations? And let me just pull out a few things I see from Nehemiah. 5 things I see in Nehemiah to help us understand a one-to-one conversation. A little bit of wisdom here, hopefully. You see, before Nehemiah was the leader rebuilding the wall, he was a cupbearer to the king. And we glimpse a rare conversation he had there. Probably had very few conversations with the king. He wouldn't be allowed to have the king. And in Nehemiah 2, we read, in the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Xerxes, when wine was brought for him, I took the wine and gave it to the king. I had not been sad in his presence before. So the king asked me, why does your face look so sad when you are not ill? This can be nothing but sadness of heart. I was very much afraid. But I said to the king, may the king live forever. Why should my face look sad when the city where my ancestors are buried lies in ruins and its gates have been destroyed by fire? The king said to me, what is it you want? Then I prayed to the God of heaven, and I answered the king, if it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favour in his sight, let him send me to the city in Judah where my ancestors are buried, so that I can rebuild it. So 5 points that I see in this, and just some general points around one-to-one conversations. Number 1, know the best route of communication for each person. It would have been no good for Nehemiah to have come running to the king with his needs. He was a servant, and he would have been sacked, if not killed, for that action. He knew for the king, it was only for him to speak to the king if the king had spoken to him. He couldn't send the king a letter. He had to wait for the king to speak to him. Some people in your team love chatting, but some will hate the phone. Some value face-to-face, but some prefer the quickness of a text or a WhatsApp message. And so my first point of one-to-one conversation is try to identify the best route to communicate to each person. Number 2, listen. In a conversation, it can be so tempting to be thinking about what we're going to say rather than actually listening to what is being said. But that's always a bad mistake. So listen actively. Give attention. Put away the phone. Focus on the person and show that you're interested in them, not just your cause. Really listen. Number 3, be open and honest. Nothing shuts down a conversation quicker than, I'm okay. The king, when he said to Nehemiah, why do you look so down? He says, I'm all right. That would have shut down the conversation. Be open and honest in the right times and the right context. Connect on a heart level with people, not just on a mind level. Number 4, keep God in the conversation. I love how it says Nehemiah paused and prayed and then spoke. Those quick arrow prayers, Lord help me, are so powerful because they not only do they bring God into your thinking and your conversation, but they also give you a little moment to pause before you say something that you regret. You know, delay is so much better than trying to retract what you've said. Delay to think is so much better than trying to pull back words once you've said them. And then number 5, don't make assumptions. Nehemiah could have assumed that the king's a wise king. He knows what's going on in his kingdom and beyond. He would have known the problems. We can wrongly assume that others know what's going on, what's happening, or what we are thinking. Don't assume. I'm sure you've heard the old phrase that to assume makes an ass of you and me. Don't make assumptions. So 5 little things there that I see in this little communication of Nehemiah and the king. Know the best route of communication for each person. Listen intently. Be honest and open. Keep God in the conversation. And don't make assumptions. Maybe take a moment, pause the video and take a moment to think about someone who makes you feel special when you are in conversation with them. What do they do? What do they say? Can you take this and apply it to your conversations with others? We watched as a family the other day A Beautiful Day in the Neighbourhood, a wonderful film about an amazing man, Mr. Rogers from America, a children's TV presenter, but who had the ability to make every person feel special and listened to. If you want to do something really helpful in your leadership, watch that film and see the process of focusing on one person. I think in terms of a UK, the greatest example I've seen of that is Rob Parsons from Care for the Family. The times I've met him, suddenly, no matter what's going on, it feels like he's interested in me and he's focused on me. A phenomenal thing to come across. So what is it that you've seen in others in conversation, and then see how you can apply that into your own conversations? Going to finish this session, and I'm going to look at the concept of difficult conversations. No one likes them. They're difficult to have a difficult conversation, but in leadership they are essential. A friend of mine once politely said, and he used slightly different words, that a pile of poo will only get smellier. You know, if you leave a difficult situation, it will not resolve itself. It will just get worse. So difficult conversations are often needed, and needed quickly. And Nehemiah has one of these difficult conversations, and we can read about it in chapter 5. You see, what had happened is that the people were complaining because they were working on the wall, and they were so therefore they couldn't work their field, so they were having to buy food and grain and things, and they were having to borrow money and then paying back huge interest on the money, and they were starting to grumble. Nehemiah says the following: "When I heard their complaints, I was very angry. After thinking it over," notice that pause moment again, "after thinking it over, I spoke out." And this is what he said. And then a bit later on, "Then I called a public meeting to deal with the problem. At the meeting, I said to them, 'What you're doing is not right. I myself, as well as my brothers and my workers, have been lending the people money and grain. But now let us stop this business of charging interest. You must restore their fields, vineyards, olive groves and homes to them this very day, and repay the interest you charged when you lent them money, grain, new wine and olive oils.' They replied, 'We will give everything back and demand nothing more from the people. We will do as you say.' Then I called the priests and made the nobles and officials swear to do what they had promised." And I think we can learn a lot about difficult conversations. We look at this one from chapter 5. So a few things from this, and then a few thoughts just to finish off at the end. Number one, be aware of a difficult conversation. Is it a public or is it a private conversation? Jesus talks when he's talking about problems with our brothers to first of all go in private, and then at some stage to maybe make it public, take someone else with us. Decide whether it's a public or a private, but can I just say, never make it a secret conversation. I will, if I'm having a difficult conversation, I will always say to someone, look, I need to talk about this with someone else, so I've got accountability for me and for this conversation we're having. As it was a group issue, Nehemiah decided to have a public conversation. But often when dealing with a person, it's better to have a private conversation, because this gives them grace to respond rightly and to be restored before everyone else is aware of it. But as I said, really avoid the secret conversations because they are not helpful. So number one, is it public, is it a private conversation? Number two, pause and think. Do you see it again that Nehemiah, after thinking it over, if a difficult issue is thrust on you all of a sudden, then use a line like, can I think this one about it? Can I think this one through and get back to you tomorrow, please? If you know you're going to have a different conversation, think it through thoroughly. There are a number of times where people have made a mistake because they've rushed into something without pausing and thinking. Don't be rushed. Be happy to say, look, I just need to think this one through. Pause and think. Number 3, be honest, direct, and sensitive. Nehemiah is very honest and very direct, but I would imagine he would have done it in a tone that was sensitive and encouraging and allowed people to hear what he was saying. You see, by being direct, you're dealing with the problem. By flouncing around the issue, you often make it worse. But remember that being direct doesn't mean being rude or aggressive. Do it in a loving way with an open heart. Then summarize at the end. And if necessary, keep a record of it. Nehemiah got the priests in so that the people could see and agree that this is what they were going to do. It's good to keep notes. It's good to summarize and say, so what we've talked about today is, and what we've agreed to do is, and to summarize it down. And then the last point isn't in Nehemiah, but is one that I've learnt over the time, and I just want us to spend a bit of time on. Remember, what is said is not always what is heard. I love a book by Dr. Stephen Peters, the Chimp Paradox, and in that book, in the first half of the book, he talks about the inner chimp. And let me just try and explain that to you for a moment, and I should show you a little video as well. He was a sports psychologist who's done loads of works with elite athletes, and particularly helping them, the British cycling team, for example, helping them deal with that voice in their head at 5 a.m. when they think, I don't want to get up, I don't want to get out of bed. That voice that just goes, I'm not doing, and allowed them to work through that, to work with the inner chimp that has a tantrum. You can't ignore it, you can't get rid of it, but you can work with it. So just watch this short video that I found. It's a way of reading a book in 90 seconds. Hopefully that video is helpful. But you see, what can often happen is when we're having a difficult conversation, remember, you are being rational, you've thought about it, you're being reasonable. That's the human element of your brain speaking. But when the person hears it, they're responding, they're reacting, it's their emotion. So in effect, you need to think about it as if you're talking to a chimp. You're not going to get to a reasoned outcome. I've had examples where I've gone to had a difficult conversation with someone, we've explained it, we've been rational, their inner chimp has reacted, but then instead of walking away, allowing them to come to terms with situations and think it through, we've carried on the conversation. It's just got worse and worse. Sometimes when dealing with difficult conversations, we have to have the conversation and then walk away, and then maybe come back 2-3 days later when the inner chimp has settled down, and then we can talk human to human. I hope that makes a little bit of sense. It is also good to another meme that I love in these sort of difficult conversations is try and understand where people are coming from as well. And I'm sure you've seen it, the cartoon of the number 6 on the floor, where they're looking at it from both points of view and arguing over the same thing. As a leader in the difficult conversations, don't just think of it from your perspective, but come around and see it from someone else's perspective too. I hope that's of help, and I hope that quick summarise of the chimp paradox can help you in difficult conversations to understand why someone might be reacting as they do when you think it's all rational and thought through. It really has helped me understand the reactions of people aren't them, but it's this inner chimp, this emotions coming through. So in this first session, we've looked at what it is for teams to flourish. We've looked at conversation. We've looked at communication and one-to-one conversation. And then we've had a look at difficult conversations, how we might go about them, and some things to help us. I hope that's been of help. I hope and I pray that you don't have to have too many difficult conversations through your leadership journey, but you will have some. And I hope you will approach them in the right way with God behind you and with the strength to see God's solution work out. We've always had the remit, I always want to leave the door of grace open. So I hope when I have a difficult conversation and then someone flounces out and walks away, there's always a door of grace. There's not a bitterness and you're never allowed back. It should always be the door of grace open for people to come back. But other times we do need to have those difficult conversations to deal with issues and resolve issues that if we ignore them, just get worse and worse. So I pray a strength of God into you as you lead teams. I pray that he will give you the wisdom that you need to lead teams. And I pray he will show you how to have good, wholesome, godly conversations with those that you lead. Bless you and speak to you soon. Thanks.